Hi, good afternoon. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored and excited to welcome you to today's conversation between Professor Ethan Kross and Dr. David Schreiber. Thanks for joining us. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of over 350 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for introductions. We are excited to welcome back Ethan Kross to FAN for his third event about his best-selling new book, Shift. Ethan is one of the world's leading experts on emotion regulation and an award-winning professor in the University of Michigan's top-ranked psychology department and its Ross School of Business. He studies how the conversations people have with themselves impact their health, performance, decisions, and relationships. Joining Ethan is Dr. David Schreiber, a psychiatrist specializing in child, adolescent, and adult crisis care. He is the CEO and co-founder of Compass Health Center and Compass Virtual, the largest provider of intensive non-hospital-based psychiatric care in Illinois. Compass also serves patients in Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Wisconsin through both in-person and virtual services and will be opening soon in Minnesota. Dr. Schreiber earned his medical degree from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York City, completed his adult psychiatry residency at Yale University School of Medicine, and his child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship at New York Presbyterian Hospital. He's also my very dear friend, and we're thrilled that Compass is such a strong sponsor of FAN. Let's welcome Ethan Kross and David Schreiber to FAN.
Thank you, Lonnie. Maybe you could show your picture one more moment. I just want to thank you. Yesterday you called me up and I was in a rush running to the office. And I probably run a little bit stressful. And you called me up, you gave me a few words of encouragement, and you were an emotional shifter for me. So thank you so much. Thank you for 14 years of partnership between Compass and FAN. It's been incredible. So much gratitude, the work that you do for the community and the work we're able to do as partners. So thank you to you and FAN and to all of Compass who put this together today.
Well, Lonnie, you're muted, but we can read your lips, I'm
Thank
sure,
you. Sorry.
very
Thank you so
skillfully.
much. Love the partnership. Thank you, David, for those very kind words. Thank you so much. Enjoy your conversation.
Thank you. Ethan, been great to get to know you over the last few months. This book you wrote, Shift, is incredible. Taking a complex topic and making it so digestible. I'm really excited about the discussion today. There are a lot of clinicians, people who treat patients, clients who work with students, and they're here to build on their toolkit. So I want to increase those tools available to them. I want to talk about the data and the science behind those tools. Then also want to give a little bit of time at the end to talk about clinician burnout. So, but before we kind of get started, lots to cover here. I want to pass to you if anything you want to say.
Well, first, I just want to thank Fan and yourself for hosting me for this conversation. I've had a chance to get to know the organization over the past year, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful group of individuals running it, and what I think it does for this community, sharing science with folks in ways that can help them is just it's beautiful to be a part of it. So, thanks, Fan, and David, thanks to you for being willing to host me to share what I know about emotions and how to manage them with a group of people who have a platform for disseminating that knowledge further for helping folks, which is why I got into this business. So it's a delight to be here. And maybe let me just give you a little bit about myself. You, of course, know this, David, but those of you who I have not spoken with, which is I'm guessing the majority of you may not. I'm what you might think of as like a mind mechanic. So what I do is I try to understand the nuts and bolts that explain how emotions work in our minds and brains and how you can push them around if you want to lower their volume or lengthen or shorten how long they last. And so we do a lot of research in my lab on um, non-clinical populations, and we kind of learn about those mechanics from those groups. And often those insights that we derive then have direct implications for clinical populations of the sort that um, you are working with constantly. And so eager to just kind of think through with you how we can extend our findings to those individuals who really stand to gain a lot from them.
Awesome. Thank you. So before we kind of get into the tools itself, I think it's really important for us to kind of level set and define, right? Define some of the tools we're going to talk about and the nuances. So could you please define between the difference between thoughts feelings, and emotions?
Absolutely. So emotions are an umbrella term that we use to refer to a response we have to something in the world that is meaningful to us. Now, this can be a response to something in the actual physical world or something in our minds that we imagine. And when that response, that emotion is triggered, it activates what we call a coordinated response. So, what do I mean by that? Well, there are oftentimes things happening physiologically within our body when we experience an emotion. So why don't we pick on everyone's most um, commonly used punching bag for emotional punching bag anxiety. I feel like that's currently the emotion that is really in vogue and on everyone's awareness. So when you're anxious, you often feel it manifest in your stomach. I often have a kind of fight or flight response. I'm right off to the bathroom. So there's a physiological component. Our emotions often also hijack the way we think about our circumstances. So in the case of anxiety, we tend to zoom in very narrowly on the problem at hand. And there's also a behavioral and motor component to this. So you can often see it when people are anxious. There's a clenching that accompanies that response too. So emotions are pushing around those different elements of our minds and bodies. Now, thinking is often a component of our emotional response, and it can often drive an emotion. For example, I could think myself into all sorts of emotional states. And David, I'm going to guess you and I have never talked about this, but are you adept at thinking your way into certain kinds of undesirable emotional states?
Well, we're going to talk about thinking and also talk about journaling. And I think I fancy myself being a good thinker, but now I realize we're going to talk about it. I should be better at journaling.
Well, we'll get to journal in a little bit. We can think our way out of problems, but we can often think our way into emotional problems too. So, in the book, I talk about how we often tend to contrast thinking and emotions as though they are these two separate states. That's not true. Thinking is inherently intertwined with the experience of emotions. And then the other vocabulary piece here to define our feelings. So what are feelings and how they are they synonymous with emotions? No, they're not. So our feelings are the conscious component of an emotional experience. It's the part of the emotion that we are aware of. When we are experiencing emotions, there are things happening in your brain, like networks of activity that are becoming increasingly active when you're in an emotional versus non-emotional state. Stuff is going on in your body with your organs and your blood. You have no awareness of those physiological shifts that are occurring within you. But there is a component that bubbles up to the surface that you are aware of. So when I'm anxious, I'm aware of the tightness that I feel in my chest. When I'm anxious, I'm aware of how I am continually on edge. Feelings are, if you were to compare that to a physical problem, like let's say an illness, when you become sick, when you get the flu, you're going to develop fever and chills, and you are aware of that, but you're not aware of how your immune system levels are changing in different directions directly. So feelings are the conscious component of an emotion.
So obviously they have a lot of impact, and we're going to focus on emotions. Can you talk a little bit about the science behind why it matters? Whether it's talking about some of the studies you've done or the Dunedin study, where we really see the impact of what with those who are able to regulate their emotions.
Yeah. So first of all, disclaimer, and I can't remember, David, if I said this, you are licensed to tell me, yeah, you already said that, Ethan. Move on to the next one if I do that here. But um, I am a card carrying scientist. So everything that I talk about in my book and everything that we are talking about here is grounded in rigorous science. It's very important to me. When we talk about what is at stake, let's start by talking about the pain points that are associated with emotion dysregulation, the inability to effectively manage our emotions. And what I mean by emotion regulation, by the way, is your ability to align the way you think, feel, and behave with your goals. So there are going to be some cases where you may want to feel more of an emotion, and it would be effective emotion regulation if you're able to achieve that outcome. oftentimes our goals, and I presume where so many of us on this call are united, oftentimes it's about decreasing the intensity of a negative response and shortening it. Um, if we're not capable of doing that, we know that that has direct implications for our ability to think and perform. We're often increasingly distracted. Our emotions capture our attention. They leave very little left over that allows us to focus. David, we haven't talked about this, but I'm 99.9% certain of the following. When you have been consumed with an emotion, and really stressed out, if in that state you sit down to read a few pages in a book, you read the information, but you get to the end and don't remember anything you've read. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Right? I have yet to meet someone who that doesn't apply to. So emotions consume our attention, make it hard for us to then have anything left over to do the things that we want and need to do. They can cause friction in our relationships with other people because we're consumed with an emotion. We often displace it. This is called displaced negative emotion. We take it out on other people. Or sometimes we talk incessantly about the things that are bugging us because we want to get support, but the emotions keep stirring in our minds. And so this can have an effect of pushing other people away. We know emotions don't feel good subjectively when we are stuck in prolonged negative states and can also have deleterious effects on our physical health. Because what negative emotions, when chronically activated, do is they keep our cortisol mediated fight or flight response chronically activated over time. That exerts a wear and tear in our body that is physically damaging and predicts things like problems of cardiovascular disease, inflammation, even certain forms of cancer. In my book, I talk about this beautiful, beautiful longitudinal study. It's called the Dunedin study. And what this study did is it tracked this cohort of newborns from the time they were born over the course of their lives. It's been going on now for like 40 or 50 years. And what the experimenters did in this study is they profiled people's ability to manage their emotions at multiple points in childhood and adolescence. And then they looked to see what does it predict people who are good at their emotion regulation in childhood and adolescence, what does that predict later on in life? It's remarkable. So the kids who are good at managing their emotions, they're doing better at school and at work. They're healthier. Their organs are aging less. They're aging more slowly, not less fast. So there's signs that they are more healthy and have more vitality. Whereas the people who are poor at emotion regulation, they're not getting the same level, they're not achieving the same kinds of educational and occupational goals. They're having financial difficulties. They're having health problems. So this is really, I think, such a core capacity, but a message I always reinforce what I love about the Dunedin study is, in addition to showing that early childhood and adolescent self-control or emotion regulation has these predictive qualities, it also demonstrated that people can change. Some people in the study, as childhood went on, they got better at self-control. And as they got better, so did the outcomes that were indexed throughout the course of the study. And the kids who got worse at managing their emotions, that was also documented, those kids did worse over time. And so to me, what that demonstrates, we can push this around. We can shift people's ability to manage their emotions. And if we do, there is a very real prospect of consequentially improving people's lives. And I think that is something to be really hopeful about and excited about.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a few. But before we go there, I want to get into a little bit of the clinical space. And one of the things in the clinical space where patients come in, and they come in a lot of times with a multitude of emotions, right? Sometimes they might come in with just sadness, but sometimes they might come in with sadness and anger. And you said this statement, I don't remember exactly verbatim, but you said something like, our emotions don't only blend, they also interact. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about it, colors, so you look at your book, you have a great visual of colors there. And I don't know if this was intentional or not, but we know that there's red and there's blue, right? But red and blue together make purple. So when people come in with, let's say, sadness and anger, when we think about it from a therapeutic intervention perspective, should we think about it as sadness and anger, or should we think about it as the interaction of those emotions and that we're now treating a new emotion where we just haven't found, we don't have the definition for it yet?
So I think it's easy for us to talk about discrete emotions because these are defined categories, right? And we like talking about simple things. We like to simplify the world. But in fact, our experience of emotion is not that neat and tidy as I talk about in the book, and as you are articulating very eloquently right now. You did get the quote, the paraphrase correct, so bravo. Our emotions can bleed into one another, and we can, anxiety can quickly morph into a kind of sadness reaction, like, oh my God, I'm still anxious. When is this ever gonna end? I want to be back to myself. And that could like depress us physiologically and also our mood. And so for me, the key here from a clinical and intervention point of view is it's not about matching a tool so much with a particular emotional state. It's understanding the kind of emotional portrait of the individual. What are the triggers that they're grappling with, and what are the kinds of tools that they're trying to bring to bear that are not effective? And then trying to identify how to match certain tools with a particular situation that they're struggling with. And, what we tend to see in a lot of our research, not all of this is with clinical patients, a lot of it is not, is when you are able to help people manage these big negative emotions, plural, like let's say people are dealing with the uncertainty in the current climate, or COVID anxiety. Like those are big, complicated issues for a lot of people. If you're able to find a combination of tools that work for that individual, their reports of how anxious and depressed, they feel tend to move in the same direction, and they move down. So it's really about finding the right sets of tools that work for folks. David, one finding that I'm pretty sure I talk about this towards the end of the book. We did some research on during COVID on and COVID anxiety that has really powerful shifted the way I think about this space of emotion regulation and shifting for short. So we wanted to do in that study is we wanted to see what are the tools that really move the needle on people's COVID anxiety. And so we did these longitudinal studies. They're called diary studies, where every day we had people at the end of the day rate their level of COVID anxiety that day and tell us what are the tools that you used to manage your anxiety. And we had a cross section of people, including some folks who were quite vulnerable to experiencing anxiety. And what we found was number one, there was no magic bullet. So we asked people, I think, about 18 different tools that they could have used each day. What we found is on average, people use like 4 or 5 different tools each day to manage their COVID anxiety. And there were many, many paths to success. So as long as people were using healthy tools, so not things like chronic avoidance or alcohol and venting, there were many pathways to feeling better. And those different pathways, the tools that worked for one people were quite different from the tools that worked for someone else. There was even variability from day to day. So the tools that worked for me on one day, on Monday, to manage my COVID anxiety were often different from the tools that worked for me on Tuesday or Wednesday, which speaks to this complexity of our emotional response that you are gesturing towards here. We think COVID anxiety, dealing with COVID, what that means for someone can change from one day to the next. One day it may be, my God, I don't want to get sick, and what might happen if I develop long-term COVID? On another day, it might mean, what happens if my kids are sick and they're still out of school? And those are very different sets of concerns that give rise to a different kind of emotional response.
But to continue on that, in the clinical space, to understand which tools to use, a lot of times you need to understand the characteristics of these emotions. One of the things I really thought was really interesting you brought up in the book was you talked about longevity of emotions. You talked about, I think you said something like 204, sadness has lasts 240 times longer than I think it was shame.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the characteristics of emotions? And I also want to, I'll take this a little further. I would love for you, you talked about the environment we are in today. I would love for you to talk a little bit about hate as an emotion. And I bring this up in the context also of, you and I, we have a lot of things that we experience in parallel And one, we were both in New York City during 9/11,
Mm.
and we both were there post 9/11. And we're talking a lot about the clinical space and how do you help people emotion on the individual level. But I'm also wondering, can you shift emotion on the collective level? And I think about that post 9/11 time. It's probably the only time in my life I felt collectively, maybe this is not true, but I felt collectively we were shifting an emotion together. Any thoughts about that?
Yes. Let me go back to the dynamics of emotion question. Let's just knock that out real quick, and then we'll get to the collective emotions and the hate. So there's this beautiful research that has been done that has attempted to characterize um, different qualities of emotional experiences. And a colleague of mine, his name is Philippe Verdun. He's a Dutch psychologist who has really studied the duration of emotion. And what he has found is that you can you track people over time and you have them report each day at multiple time points the intensity of their emotions and how long they last. And what he sees is that um, sadness, for example, is an emotion that has a shorter the volume on a sadness experience tends to be lower than when you experience anger, as an example. But you recover more quickly from anger than you do from sadness. The temporal trajectory of sadness is a lot longer. And he and others have profiled lots of different emotional experiences to show you what the time course of those emotions are. And I think that from a clinical point of view is vitally relevant because, as you know, depending on where a person is in the timeline of an emotional experience, that can have implications for how you intervene. There's another wonderful psychologist by the name of Bernard Rimet that is another, he's a Belgian psychologist, actually. He spent his entire career trying to understand a simple question. When and why do people talk about their emotions? Do they share them with other people? And what he found was people essentially have two basic core goals when they're struggling with some difficult experience. They have these social goals, these social and emotional needs that they're trying to fulfill. When you're struggling, you want to feel like you're not alone. You want to feel like you're, someone, you want someone to validate your experience, to normalize it, to make it clear you're still part of the social group. And those are the first goals you want to satisfy when people first have a big emotional response triggered. But as the intensity of that response wanes, then there's an opportunity to get in there and help people address their cognitive goals. That's a second set of goals they have. What are cognitive goals? Nip this goddamn thing in the bud so I can move on with my life. I don't want to keep thinking about it. Now, there's a ordering sequence here. So the research shows that if you try to intervene cognitively too early, when people are in the initial midst of experiencing a big emotional response, it's really hard to intervene cognitively at that point. Having the social component activated there, there's a fit. But if you take some time for it to mellow out, then you can come in there with the cognitive support. So, I actually talked a lot about this whole process in my first book, Chatter. There's a whole book on how these social and cognitive needs interface with the time course of an emotion. And Bernard Rimet, if we want to put some of that information in the chat, fantastic resource, beautiful, beautiful science here that I think everyone could benefit from. So let me pause there and see if I've answered your question on duration. I want to make sure I have before we shift to 9/11 and collective emotions. I have not forgotten about that.
No, very helpful because obviously it has tremendous clinical implications by our ability to you start a session, you leave a session, and what the expectation might be in the next session, depending on what kind of emotions people are experiencing and how long you think it's going to last. So understanding those characteristics, really matter when it comes to clinical interventions.
Absolutely. And I could say for me, now I'm speaking on a personal anecdotal level. What I just described about social and cognitive needs and their time course and how that interfaces with an emotion, that has been an absolute game changer for me personally, both in my ability to support other people who come to me for emotional support, as well as my attempts to get support for myself when I'm struggling with an emotional response. We have lots of mental health practitioners here, so all of you, of course, know the secret that I know, which is just because we're good at helping others, sometimes we struggle ourselves as well. So that has really been a game-changing set of findings. It gives me a roadmap for how to steer interventions with other folks. All right, let's shift to collective emotions, 9/11, um, hate, but also the opposite of hate, which is coming together. So, it's interesting, David. I moved to New York City for graduate school literally 2 weeks before the 9/11 attacks. I was in the Twin Towers a week before. There was this mall underneath it. The subway used to travel through it. I was just exploring New York. And so it's pretty remarkable in terms of like a spike on my timeline that I can remember that moment really vividly. And there were two concomitant sets of, I would say, collective emotional experiences that I remember being salient during that time. Number one, there was this wonderful banding together that occurred, where like it brought out like the best of New Yorkers who, I think I'm allowed to say this as a New Yorker, and David, you can disagree if you like, but New Yorkers kind of have a reputation for being relatively gruff and like expletives are not missing from their vocabulary or their usage of hand gestures, is how I would describe it. And you just saw everyone kind of banding together in the weeks and even months following 9/11 to support one another. There was something really beautiful of that collective emotional experience. At the same time, there was also a lot of divisiveness that began to percolate as well. A lot of, I think hatred is a good emotion that was directed towards certain ethnic groups. And, you continue to see those kinds of divisive attitudes and emotions targeted towards different groups, in response to various social experiences to this day. When that happens, I think there are a couple of points about emotion that come to mind that are relevant here that I think we can all be mindful of to play a role in hopefully being aligned in the goal of pushing people in the positive direction. So number one, principles of emotional contagion, which I talk about in Shatter in Shift. Uh, Emotions are contagious. They can spread like wildfire. And for really good reason. We are an emotional species, so we're often referencing other people in our community to understand how we should feel ourselves. Because you're always trying to understand how you should feel in any given circumstance so that you understand how to navigate that circumstance. So emotions are contagious. Um, Social media has added another layer to this. It provides us with a giant megaphone for broadcasting our emotions collectively in ways that we've never before had. Social media can also strip away some of the safeguards that we evolved to prevent divisive emotions from spreading globally like wildfire. What do I mean by that? So, David, right now, I am, for the most part, looking at your face. I must admit, sometimes I'm going to the camera to make it look like I'm just looking. You could see my eyes, but I'm looking at your face right now. You just gave me a wealth of information, right? You smiled, and I saw how your eyes were. It was a genuine smile. If I were to say something ugly to you right now, which I won't, but if I would likely see that on your face. I would get immediate feedback, which would constrain my reaction. There's also a norm that you don't say bad things to other people's faces that has developed culturally in this country, in most parts of it. So there are lots of safeguards that prevent us from spreading hateful messages to other people. You go to social media, you strip away that kind of human interface. It makes it a lot easier for us to spread nasty emotions. There's another thing about social media. I don't want to harp too much on it, but there's one other important feature here for people to be mindful of. There's this basic principle. As time goes on, our emotions tend to fade with time. There's a natural time course that characterizes the overwhelming majority of our emotional responses. An emotion is triggered. As time goes on, it eventually fades. So when you get really aggravated about something, you may in the heat level, all you may want to do is shout out loud and say how much you can't stand this person or this group. But in the offline world, you got to find someone to share that message with. There's not someone always right next to you or even available via phone for you to share that message. You whip out this thing, and boy, oh boy, I can get on a platform and share that hatred whenever I want, and there's no face looking back at me to constrain how I talk about it. That makes it easy for these emotions to spread. And so what I've done here is try to break down some of the mechanisms that explain why in the current times we can see these collective emotions of hatred spread so easily. I'm going to shut up in 30 seconds and kick it back to you. I desperately need a drink of water. What I will finally say on this topic is the thing to remember is to go back to where we started with 9/11 and coming together. One of the best ways of bringing different groups together is to unite them behind a common goal or sense of purpose and identity. We're all like sons and daughters, you know. We're all trying to achieve a certain set of goals in our lives, and like linking people up at that level is often really helpful for pushing people back into the collective zone. Okay, done. Over to you.
Well, the importance of remembering the human connection you talked about, but then also talking about the importance of the value of pause, and something we've forgotten about and which social media really takes advantage of. But I want to keep moving forward, and because obviously we promise people to continue to build on in their toolkit and their toolbox. And one of the things that I like to touch on is sensory shifters. All right, I think it's probably one of the easiest shifters for us to engage with. And you talked a little bit about the importance of self sensory pathways and emotional pathways being together. But let's talk about specifically about things that we could utilize that are available, that are at our disposal, whether it's us as clinicians, as people, for our patients, that are really available. You talk about music at Compass. I'll tell you this is that at Compass, all of our programs are integrated by evidence-based care. So the foundations are CBT, DBT, ERP, ACT, to name a few. But we also sprinkle experiential therapies. Things like art therapy, pet therapy, music therapy, yoga therapy, movement therapy. And I will tell you is that they work so effectively. And your research really justifies and validates why they're so effective from a sensory shifter perspective. Talk about music or talk about something else that is readily available to us that we're just underutilizing, but have such an impact on emotional shifting.
Okay, so let me share a fun, I think it's a fun anecdote for how I got into this topic of sensory experiences and their impact on emotion. First of all, like what is sensation? It's how we take in information about the world. It's like we have satellite dishes mounted all over our body, sight, sound, touch, smell, and the purpose of these different modalities is bring information in because we need to know how to navigate the world. And part of understanding how to navigate the world is knowing what's good or bad for us. What should we approach? What should we avoid? So, sensation and emotion are intimately linked. Part of how sensation works is through emotionality. Um, I have been benefiting emotionally from the senses throughout my life, as has every single person on this webinar, right? It probably goes back to as early as leaving the womb, if we want to go back in time. Uh, Skin to skin contact, that's a sensory experience that soothes babies and creates bonds between caretakers and their children. Music, why do I listen to music? I like the way it makes me feel. It makes me feel, if I listen to the right kind of music, really, really good, very, very quickly. Some music can push me in a different direction. Yet, if you would have asked me, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, when I struggle with a big, like if I'm anxious about something or sad or angry, what do I do to manage that emotion? I would not have said I reach for I reach for my playlist, right? Or I view a piece of art, something visually beautiful. It was an experience with my daughter that alerted me to this. So I used to coach my daughter's soccer team, and when she was younger, maybe 5 or 6, she woke up one Saturday morning and she was in a terrible as a parent, I can say annoying funk, if you know what I mean. Just she was like, kind of moping around, wouldn't get ready, was
Never happens with my kids.
never like, getting her shin guards on. You would think this is like the greatest challenge of the human condition. And she was bumming me out because I would look forward to coaching soccer throughout the week. And I finally managed to get her into the car. We start driving to the soccer field, and then just fortuitously, my absolute favorite song comes on the radio or the speakers. I guess it was from my phone. Um, Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'." Familiar with the song?
Are you going to demonstrate?
I will not, because that would be a negative sensory experience for folks. But if you're not familiar with it, Google it. You'll know it. One of the great songs of all time. And I start getting really excited and I start leaning into it and I am singing because I'll do that in front of my daughter and I'm bopping the steering wheel, and I'm getting into it a little bit more to exaggerate. And I look in the rear view mirror. Normally my daughter, when I do this kind of stuff, rolls her eyes and is terribly embarrassed, but I notice that she's bopping along and she's kind of humming to the song too. And our mood instantly lifted, like boom, like that. And by the time we got to the soccer field 5 minutes later, she bolts out of the car, scores in my memory 1,000 goals. It wasn't that much, but you know what I mean? She was just full of energy. So after that experience, I went back to the lab, talked to my student about this. Like, has this ever does this resonate with you? So of course. And then we look in the literature and we find that there's remarkably little research documenting mechanistically these links between sensation and emotion regulation. And so we ended up writing a scientific review paper on this. It's called sensory emotion regulation. And the take home is all of your senses have the potential to shift you virtually automatically within milliseconds in some cases. But people don't often avail themselves of these tools. Now, shifting via your senses, listening to the right music, or um, scent, that's another powerful one. Like, did you spray yourself with an emotion regulation spray of some sort today, David?
Oh, I have it in my house.
You
I
have it
think
in your house.
I think we have the Westin Hotel in my house.
There you go. So like you do it, right? Like companies, hotels pipe scents through the ventilation to improve the scent in hotels and homes. Um, there are all these different ways you can push your emotions around. That's not going to cure depression or anxiety. What it can do, though, is provide a momentary shift that then puts you in a better position to potentially fold in other tools. So Sense is easy to use, incredibly underutilized set of tools.
Well, it's one of my favorite sayings, raindrops on a rock make dents over time, right? We're not looking for cures, we're looking for little dents that make a difference.
That's right. It's turning the volume down. I always tell people these tools that we're talking about, this is not taking oftentimes when people seek out help, as you all know, they're actually struggling with difficult things. And we're not talking about taking the greatest struggles in life and turning them into tea parties. What we're talking about doing is bringing tools to bear that make those experiences more manageable. They turn the volume down just enough and shorten the duration of those emotional experiences just enough to get you back on track. And I think that's the realistic goal that we need to have. Like you go to the gym, you don't develop Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles like from one engagement, right? Like, well, I've never developed Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles, but it takes time and you keep coming back to it and you become disciplined in using the tools. I think the same is true when it comes to emotional fitness.
Yeah, which continue on beyond senses, sensory shifters is let's talk about language shifters. And I talk about language. I really enjoyed this part of the book because I will say I'm a tennis player, but I'm a tennis player also because I can't play any other sports today. But as a tennis player growing up, I was one of those players that talked a lot out loud and try to motivate myself. And I think at some point I realized that maybe it was a little odd behavior. Now I just kind of kept it regulated internally. But I did really appreciate the validation here when you talked about, and I love this term, the Solomon paradox, and the impact of pronouns when it comes to emotional shifters.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me break that down for folks. And this is probably my my go-to tool, the first line of defense when I find myself needing to regulate. So first of all, what's Solomon's paradox? Solomon's paradox is this, in my, there's a lot of research on this. In my experience, I've yet to meet someone who disagrees with it. So I say it's near universal in at least in my estimation. We're a lot better at giving advice to others and taking that advice and following that advice ourselves. This is named after the Bible's King Solomon, who to this day is known to be one of the wisest leaders of all time. Other people came to receive his counsel and he offered really good advice. Yet when you look at his own life, he made a slew of terrible decisions that ultimately contributed to his kingdom's demise. I think it's easy for a lot of us to come up with those experiences, right? We're all hypocrites at some level is another way of saying this. And now you know the scientific reason why that is. Um, so if you understand Solomon's paradox, we can give great advice to others, but we don't always give that great advice to ourselves. There's a tool you can use that capitalizes on that phenomenon to help you. And it's called distanced self-talk. What it involves doing is using language to talk to yourself silently, though, David. You don't want to do this out loud, silently. To silently talk to yourself like you were talking to someone else. What does that look like? All right, Ethan, how are you going to manage this situation today? Here's what I think you should do. Research shows that that makes it a lot easier for people to work through difficult experiences. It reduces the amount of time they spend ruminating about problems. It improves their performance under stress. It leaves them to make wiser judgments. They're more likely to perspective take and recognize the limits of their own knowledge. They're more likely to be ethical. Why does that work? How does that work? Well, think about when we use the word you. You is the verbal equivalent of pointing a finger at someone else. The vast majority of times that you use the word you are using that word to think about refer to another human being. When you use that word to refer to yourself, it's shifting your perspective automatically, right? It's putting you in this frame of mind. Now I'm giving advice to my buddy or my kid. I'm really good at giving advice to them without having all of the noise penetrate that might lead me in a different direction. And so the invitation to all of you and to share with your clients is uh, when they're struggling with a problem, ask them to try to coach themselves through that problem using you and their own name. Um, it might help them reason through it more effectively.
Which also you asked me for, and what I was adept at thinking also leads to journaling, where this is also very relevant. And I would admit, I was a journaler when I was younger, and I probably transitioned to thinking. And now I realize I probably should go back to journaling, but it has such relevance at Compass also. We use a lot of journaling, encouragement of patients to journal. And it really has so much science behind the effectiveness of
Yeah.
journaling.
So, distance self-talk is a type of distancing tool. Um, I would describe expressive writing or journaling as another one. And just I know the idea of distance often gets a bad rap because we tend to think about that as synonymous with avoidance. When I'm talking about distancing tools, what I'm talking about are a suite of tools that you can use with yourself or your clients to step back and then approach the experience from a more psychologically objective point of view. I'm not talking about dissociating away from the experience so you're not feeling anything. Just stepping back a little bit to broaden the scope, to broaden your perspective on a situation, to allow you to reason through it more effectively. Distance self-talk is one. Expressive writing is another tool that promotes this. So when you're journaling, what does that involve? You got a problem? Sit down, try to work through your deepest thoughts and feelings about it for 15 or 20 minutes. You're then beginning to write a story, and it's a story about yourself. So you become the character in that story that you are writing about. That that is a distancing act, and we have a paper that actually documents that writing expressively about your experiences promotes this sense of distance. Expressive writing can be really helpful because when we are lost in a big, seemingly uncontrollable negative response, the way we're thinking about it is so disorganized that we're pinballing all, what if this happens? What if that? Or oh my God, Bob. And we're not thinking through it in a linear and logical way. Writing imposes a structure on our experience. From the time we're little, we are taught when you write a story, when you write about something, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you write in sentences, you don't write in fragments. So the act of writing itself forces us to structure our experience. We start with the beginning, you get to the middle, and then you got to wrap things up. And boy, oh boy, does it feel good to wrap up the thoughts about the experiences that are bugging us. Now, here's a really interesting thing about expressive writing or journaling. In that COVID study I told you about, which by the way, it's publishable, you can download it from my website if you want to take a look at the science. Um, Expressive writing was the most effective individual strategy for improving people's anxiety from one day to the next. Out of the 18 strategies we asked about, it had the largest effect size on people's experience of anxiety. It was also the least utilized tool of all the tools we asked about. The least. So most effective, least used. I think the reason for that is number one, it's effortful. You have to sit down for 15 to 20 minutes a day, which at some point, which in some ways is it's remarkable to think about it, right? Like if you told someone just 15 minutes a day is all you need to feel a little bit better, the amount of time they're often stuck, unhappy, and in misery, like that doesn't seem like a lot to ask. And yet, consistently, people are less likely to use it. I think because it takes time. And the other reason I think people are less likely to use it is there's this vulnerability that comes with it. So when I do workshops with folks, I'll often include a journaling exercise. And when I first give the instructions, like people are edgy because I'm asking them to take these private thoughts about their experiences, which may well be incriminating in some ways, and put them down on paper. Like there's now a physical trace. So I have to give repeated assurances. We could shred it when you're done. I'll bring some lighter fluid. You could burn it, tear it up. But I think that also there's this reluctance people have to actually take the shameful thoughts, the thoughts that we're embarrassed about, and actually put them on the page.
But isn't it interesting, Ethan, what people will put on social media, but they won't put in journaling?
It's we as a species are filled with paradoxes here. Yeah.
Yeah, no, even in the 15 minutes, it depends which generation you're asking if it's a lot of time or little time to improve your shifting. But we are running out of time a little
Oh
bit.
my God,
But
I've been chatting. I've been all going
no,
to.
it's incredible. There are a few things I want to cover
Okay,
that
rapid
are
fire.
helpful.
Do it.
But I want to talk about a little bit of clinical vignettes here. So I want to talk about perspective shifting that you made mention before, but one of my most favorite shifters was mental time travel, and it'd be wrong if we didn't get to it. But I also want to talk about in the clinical setting where mental time travel sometimes, as useful as a tool it is the tool that our patients are most scared of.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
If a situation, a patient is really depressed, who are anxious, and all they ruminate, what they worry about is what happens in the future, what happened in the past. They want to avoid the future and the past as much as possible, and they just want to stay in the present. In
Yeah.
that situation, would you say mental time travel is good, or and there are ways to still utilize it, or bad and just don't use it?
I think there are ways to try using it that might be useful. So let me break this down. Uh, Let me break this down very methodically here. So, a lot of people current times emphasize the importance of constantly trying to be in the moment. I'm not a fan of that directive. Number one, it's not possible. The human mind evolved to travel in time. It's a virtue of our species. Number two, I don't think that's actually desirable to always be in the present. There's lots of good that comes from being able to travel in time in our minds. It allows you, for example, if you go into the past, this is how we learn about mistakes. I screw up all the time. I try not to screw up the same way each time, right? I'm learning from my mistakes. I'm trying to improve. Mental time travel into the past allows us to savor positive experiences. That is my sleeping pill. It's the only sleeping pill I take, right? What I do when I hit the pillow is I think about something really great that happened to people I care about or myself, and I replay that. Helps lull me to sleep. Mental time travel into the future. This is how we simulate and plan. I'm not as good at my job if I'm not imagining situations that I have to prepare for. It also allows us to fantasize about the future, thinking about the good things that might come to my family, my students, my colleagues, myself. So There's lots of ways you can mental time travel. It is absolutely true that for patients, they are getting into the mental time travel machine and it's breaking down in the negative past or the negative future in ways that are causing enormous suffering. One thing you could do when that happens is to just get them back into the present. If that's working for people, great. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like that is a mantra of, it's a very eloquent mantra of intervention from my point of view. Like if mindfulness and meditation and being present focus is working, fantastic. As you know, though, that doesn't work for everyone. No intervention does. So another thing you could consider is teaching people how to time travel in their minds more effectively. And there are two ways to consider doing that with patients. One thing you can do, teach them how to mental time travel into the future productively. This is my 2 a.m. chatter strategy to stick with the sleeping theme. Um, Every 4 to 6 weeks, I will wake up at 2 a.m. It's always 2 a.m. for me, and I'll be racked with chatter. Chatter being getting stuck in a negative thought loop about something big, intoxicatingly negative emotional experience. When that happens, I ask myself, how am I going to feel about this tomorrow morning? No matter how bad the chatter ever is at 2 a.m., David, it is always better the next morning when my brain is fully awake. The reason why that is, I'm going to do a little whiteboard here. Can you see that, everyone? Can you see that little curve? Right? So when I'm experiencing chatter, I'm zooming in on the worst part of my emotional experience. If this is an emotion, the height is the intensity of it. As time goes on, things get better. It feels terrible at 2 a.m. How is it going to feel tomorrow morning? I'm reminded of the fact that I've had chatter. I've had these big, unruly negative emotions throughout my life at 2 a.m. They've always been better the next morning. So you jump into the mental time travel machine. It reminds you what you are going through is temporary. It will eventually fade. How am I going to feel tomorrow morning? How am I going to feel next week, next month, next year? That's a very simple mental time travel operation that can often turn the volume on our emotions down, highlighting their temporary state. The other way you could do it is you could mental time travel into the past. This works differently. As I think I shared, well, as you know, David, because you've read Shift. My grandmother survived the Holocaust. Her entire family was slaughtered. She lived homeless in Eastern Poland for 3 years, moved to this country with nothing. When I get racked with a negative experience that I'm having a hard time shaking, my ace in the hole is I jump into the mental time travel machine. I program it for 1941. I set it to go back to Eastern Poland. I get out of it and I spend some time with my grandmother and grandfather as they're fleeing the Nazis. I don't have to spend a lot of time with them for my perspective to instantly be broadened, right? Like now, what I'm dealing with, yeah, it's not pleasant, but it could be a heck of a lot worse. So that's another way that you can very strategically time travel to your benefit. All of these tools, what I love about them, distant self-talk, mental time travel into the future and past, these are simple things that people can do on the fly and they can bundle them together. Simple, I think, from a clinical point of view, is really good because we know that resources are often taxed in these populations of individuals. So give them a shot if they work, keep using them and encourage them. If not, try something else.
Ethan, I'm really glad we got to talk about your bubby because obviously that really somebody who's obviously inspirational, motivational to you, have made such impact, and I share with my own personal grandparent experience on the Holocaust. So I'm glad we had that space to talk about. I know we're moving at the end of time, and we talked a lot about tools and adding on toolkits. We talked about to a toolbox. We talked about the science and the data, and there's so much more, which is why I really encourage people to buy this book. Hopefully, you get a book from us. But I also promised that we would talk a little bit about clinical burnout, clinician burnout. And I want to say, I want to probably break the fourth wall here and just thank everyone for showing up today. Everyone who showed up today showed up because you want to make a difference in whether you're treating patients, clients, or students. You want to make a difference and you want to be better. So thank you for showing up today. But I want to thank you also for showing up every day because the work we do is so impactful and there's so much suffering out there. And there are not enough of us who are willing to do this work. So I'm so thankful for everyone on the Zoom today. So one of the things I could ask you, Ethan, if there are a strategy or word of inspiration that you could give to people who do struggle with, hey, this was a really hard session. How do I get to the next session? Or this was a really hard day. How do I show up tomorrow? Maybe it's not fair to lean on you here, but I am curious if you have any tools that people could utilize to make this work. It is challenging. It is so impactful. It's incredible, but it is challenging.
Uh, I mean, absolutely, yes, 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 and thank everyone truly for the work that you do. There's so much suffering in this world, and it's not easy to ease it. What can you do when you yourself are suffering? You got to find the tools that work best for you. I wish I could prescribe specific ones. Let me tell you what I do. Um, I will go for a walk in a green space, a safe, natural setting. I've got to say safe from the New York connection, David, because parks where we grew up were where you got in trouble. But green space exposure is restorative. It's cognitively restorative. I go into the brain science behind this. That can have this replenishing function. Broadening your perspective, just reminding yourself of what is at stake here and what you are doing for this planet and society. I mean, you're doing great good. Refocusing on that why, on that higher sense of purpose is motivating and often can give us the extra juice that is needed to persevere through difficult burnout-like situations. Of course, like taking the time to take care of yourself. One of the first things I learned was the metaphor of a tree. You can have someone pull on the tree, on the branch, right? And at some point, if they're pulling too hard, the branch breaks before you have the tree topple. Remembering that too, that you are only good if you are showing up yourself strong and from a place of abundant resources, so to speak. So, those are a couple of tools I would suggest. Give yourself the same advice you would give to your best friend. Use your name and you to do it, and see how that impacts the situation.
Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you,
Great.
David.
David and Ethan, thank you for such a fabulous conversation. Really great content being driven out. We really, really, really appreciate it. We have about 1 minute left. I'm going to give a couple quick reminders for those of you seeking CEs for today. If you are an Illinois licensed provider, Compass Health Center, once they get the attendance information, they will be sending you an email with links. You need to take a quiz and complete an evaluation. It may take Compass a day to confirm your attendance for the full hour, and then you'll send you the email with the links. So for those of you wondering, how do I claim my CEs? That's how you do it. If you're wondering, we're giving away a couple hundred copies of the book. There are way more than a couple hundred people at the Zoom, so not everyone will get a free copy of the book, but many will. We will be going through again the attendance form on that. We'll be notifying book recipients again within another day or two. So I want to tidy that piece up. Recording, we are recording this. People were asking about, are we recording? We are. The recording will be sent out through the Zoom platform to everyone who registered, even for those who are unable to actually attend live, though they did register. That will go out with a selection of the links that were posted throughout chat. So if you're like, oh my gosh, all these great links that have been in all this research, yes, that will be included with the email that gets pushed out with the recording link. So I hope I've dotted a couple I's and crossed some T's there. Ethan, we are so thrilled to have you as just a star in the fan firmament. Really appreciate all of your efforts to help our community, both general public, teachers. You did private things for our school partners. You've really just been so incredible in the last couple months, and we so value the relationship. And David, Compass, we love walking this path with you guys. Thank you so much for everything that you do to support FAN, to support our work of, adult education across the lifespan. So thank you so much. And for everybody who came today, all the clinicians, non-clinicians, everyone, thank you so much for the service that you do for everyone, day in, day out. We really appreciate you and value. David, any quick statement as we close out? Anything you want to say to close out?
Just thank you, Lonnie. Thank you, Fan. Thank you, Ethan. And thank you, everyone from Compass who made this possible today. So
Yes.
thank you for everyone showing up.
Okay, more soon. Thanks, everybody, for coming.